Hi, I'm Danny Valenzuela, and I'm going to talk about my paper on the Japanese American internment during World War II and why I argued that it was not justified. So my main position was that internment was wrong for three main reasons. First, it violated the constitutional rights of American citizens. Second, it caused serious personal and economic damage to innocent families. And third, it was unnecessary because Japanese Americans still showed loyalty to the US despite propaganda that they were turning to Japan as their motherland. To start, one of my biggest points in the paper was that the government ignored very, very basic amendment rights. Around 120,000 people, Japanese Americans, were forced into camps, and most of them were American citizens. They weren't given any trial evidence against them. This was mostly evidence from the silent sacrifice video, and the government even called them evacuees, but in reality they were really just being imprisoned. Families had to leave their homes with only a few belongings and live in barracks surrounded by guards, which clearly went against the Constitution. Another major point or reason that I for this was that it caused damage to a lot of these families. People lost everything, homes, businesses, savings, all of it was gone. One example from the videos talked about a man who had a successful grocery store, but after the war he lost it all after being sent to camp. Years later, his family was still struggling. Inside the camps, some of these living conditions were terrible. People had no privacy, supplies, very little control over their own lives. There was even emotional damage that lasted for decades. A lot of people who went through this didn't even speak about it because how painful it was. My third main reason was that the internment wasn't even necessary. A lot of these Japanese Americans so proved a lot of loyalty to the United States. In one of my secondary sources about the Nazi soldiers, many of these Japanese American men volunteered to fight in the war against the Japanese and other of the Axis powers. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team became one of the most decorated units in history. This showed that the fear was used to justify internment wasn't honestly real. The reason I chose the position is because after looking at both my primary and secondary sources, it became very clear that this was a lot about fear and a lot, honestly, some just underlying racism and resentment towards Japan than some actual national security. A lot of a lot of these, uh, sorry, a lot of the resources that we had to look through honestly made it impossible to argue that it's even worth it. Uh, the most interesting part was how a lot of these people stayed loyal to their country even after being treated terribly. You'd expect that these Japanese Americans would be terribly angry, completely refused to help, but many of these men even chose to fight for the United States, which honestly made our government look even worse. Honestly, for finding my sources, it wasn't that hard. Most of these primary and secondary sources, in fact, all of them I just found them in the course. They were some of the ones listed that were extras that we could use. The main thing was honestly just kind of, without even watching them, some of them, was just picking the best ones based on their titles and general, how long they were and things like that. What I learned most from this topic was that how fragile these rights could be. It's honestly a little terrifying with how just a little bit of fear and a little bit of a risk of national security that things in law can just be thrown out the window. I mean, even a place known for life, liberty, and I think it's justice, like America, freedoms and rights and all that can be taken away very quickly. It also kind of showed how important it is to stand up against injustice. I mean, racism can cause people to do crazy things, especially when it goes unchecked. But kind of to circle back to my main argument, overall, the internment was not justified at all. It violated rights, destroyed lives, put fear into a lot of Americans, and was just a complete crap show. And is hopefully something that will never happen again. And it's important that people learn this so that it doesn't happen again. The whole reason of history is so that the bad part doesn't get repeated.